There's another house up the street. One that comes directly out to him because when he lives in his daughter, she's very morally flexible. So can I reach out to him directly because he's technically my client, but I'm looking at an issue there.
I don't see it. Yeah, I don't see it. But it's all right. Especially if she's not responding back to you.
Oh, we haven't contracts yet, so we know we can't show you. It just, nothing makes sense, you know. There's these warranties, you know, with construction, warranty plus, there's nothing about that. So it's frustrating.
Oh, I talked to the builder. Yeah. Yeah, you have a business relationship with him, so. Yep. We'll give 30 seconds. 'Cause it's 10 after 1. Anyone have any other questions before we get started? Quiet group here today. Well, let's get started then. I wanted to touch on wholesaling because we are getting some questions on it. So you know how to handle it. What I can recommend, one of the best things for you to do is go to the PARrealtors.org site and go on to the advocacy, and you can pull down this screen here that I have. And what happened, PAR had made a major effort and was very successful in getting the Real Estate Licensing and Registration Act amended. That took effect on January 4th of this year, that wholesalers had to be licensed. Wholesalers had to be licensed. It was a bill that went through the legislature in record time. So it was well received by the state legislature. And as I said, went into effect on January 4th. So now, as of January 4th, all wholesalers have to be licensed under the Real Estate Commission. Up until this point, they haven't. So they have to be licensed. So no longer can a wholesaler just buy a property or put a agreement together on a property and wholesale it. There's and then sell it, maybe without even taking title to it, and ending up taking a good chunk of money from the seller, and the seller not being aware of what is happening. And that has happened right in this office. So that is a little bit, and what the regulations do is they put some restrictions and some disclosures on now with the wholesalers. So it's wholesale transactions is defined as an undertaking to promote the sale, exchange, or purchase of an equitable interest or other interest in residential real property with the intent to assign, sell, or otherwise transfer the interest for a fee, commission, or other valuable monetary consideration without having taken title as the owner of record of interest. Basically, it is a real estate transaction where the buyer of the property never intends to take title or to own the property themselves. So it talks about equitable owner. Equitable owner. When we take you write an agreement of sale and it's signed by the buyer and seller, who owns that property? Who owns the property after you've got an agreement of sale signed on it? Two parties own it now. Two parties own it now. You have the seller which is the record owner, and you have the buyer, which is an equitable owner. So in everyday transactions that we do, the buyers, your buyers are equitable owners in that property because the seller has transferred part of their fee simple title to the buyer at that point. So the buyer has equitable owner, and that's what the wholesalers are doing. They're getting an agreement of sale on it, and they're becoming the equitable owner. So they actually are controlling that ownership of that property now. Seller is record owner. You go to the courthouse, you're going to find that the seller has the deed and they are the record owner, but they have sold their equitable interest. Now, obviously that can transfer back to them if the agreement of sale is terminated or whatever. That's what we do. And that's why we are obviously adamant on getting releases signed so that there's not a cloud on the title that somebody has. So we get releases signed by buyer and seller to release all parties, including ourselves. But that's one of the main reasons why we get that release, because they've got to release that equitable ownership into the property. So that's what the equitable ownership is. So how does it affect realtors? The realtors does not engage in wholesaling. It does not affect their practice. However, as a licensed practitioner, realtors should be aware of the legal requirements for wholesale transactions set by the law and rights afforded to consumers. In addition, brokers may set policies on the practice of wholesaling within the brokerage. So with that, and David was on a call that I could not make, but with that, we are not practicing wholesaling. We are not practicing wholesaling. So if a wholesaler comes to us to put their license with us, we're not going to license them here. We are not going to license them here. Have anything more on that, David?
Maybe just touch on, on the buyer side, because we're gonna, we are still gonna encounter that, right?
Yep, yep. We'll get into that.
I have a question.
Yes. No.
Just so I understand, as an example of a wholesaler, like an investor that wants to put properties.
Correct. Yep.
Well, not necessarily.
Well, no, not necessarily. They can be an investor that wants to flip properties. But if they're flipping properties, they're taking title to it. That's different than a wholesaler. Wholesaler's not taking title to it at all. What they're doing is they're signing an agreement of sale. And again, when I said we had to have it happen in this office, we've had it happen many times, and you can ask our title people downstairs, where the wholesaler will be sitting at one end of the table and the seller sitting at the other end of the table, and the seller ends up with a proceeds check that's maybe $20,000 less, and that $20,000 less is going to the guy at the end of the table. That's what's happening.
Like your standard flip, somebody actually purchases the house, then they fix it up, they remodel it, or maybe fully or limited, and then they put it back on the market to sell it. In this case, a wholesaler, they don't even touch the house. Generally, they're just getting it under contract and then selling it without doing a thing. They're just trying to be a middleman.
Yeah. So most of the advertisements that you see on television, and you see signs sticking around in the ground that says, "We'll buy your house for cash." That's wholesalers. That's wholesalers. They'll come in and they'll say, we'll give you X amount of money, no fees, no nothing except their fee. So, but not that there's not other people out there that don't buy them and they end up either flipping them, sometimes holding them in their own portfolio for rentals. Well,
Yes, be the benefit of a seller
working with a wholesaler unless the property is distressed. I can't
That's,
see the
that's typically what the wholesalers are looking for, is somebody that's distressed. And quite frankly, maybe the elderly, because I've had that. And say, I don't want to be bothered with anything. I just want to sell it. And what they do is they do an agreement with the seller that says, okay, we're going to give you X amount of dollars, but we're going to give that to you in 90 days because we want to have the opportunity to sell that property to somebody else.
Okay.
So,
So now, by then, needing a license, there's no more of hiring somebody to put that house in the MLS.
should not be.
Should not be, okay, because sometimes you see the agent, you contact them, and then they give you a company. So there's no more of that.
Well, not supposed to be. One of the cases we have recently, and I think that a couple of our agents been in this company, I don't remember what the name of it is, but you call them and it's listed by a company that just puts the house in the MLS. So it's what we call a limited services. You pay me $1,000, I'll put it in the MLS. You take care of all the showings, you take all the phone calls, you take all the negotiations. I don't do anything more than put it in the MLS. So now we had one of our aides then call the owner, and what she expected was the owner, and apparently it was the wholesaler. And he said he has to talk to the owner. That's what triggered her whole investigating as to, well, who is this person that I'm talking to? And the person she was talking to was not the owner of the property. He was the wholesaler trying to flip it. So he should have had a license. He should have a license and had it hanging with a broker, and it should have been listed himself. But that's the problem that we have. Okay, the requirements are a statement that an agreement of sale. Let me just back up here because I think this is part of the disclosures now. Applies the contract between the buyer and wholesaler, between the buyer and the wholesaler and the ultimate buyer. The required elements are a statement that the agreement of sale or contract for a wholesale transaction in which the wholesaler intends to assign, sell, or otherwise transfer the interest for a fee, commission, or other valuable monetary consideration without taking title as the owner of record of the interest, owner of record of the interest. And a statement that the consumer has the right to obtain an appraisal of the property from a certified real estate appraiser, to consult with a real estate licensee not affiliated with the wholesale broker, or to seek legal counsel before entering into the agreement sale. That's the disclosures that have to be made in their agreements. And a statement that the consumer has the right to cancel the agreement of sale or contract until midnight of the 30th day after the execution date of the agreement of sale or contract, or until conveyance of the property was ever first by certified return mail or any other bona fide means of delivery, including electronic or personal delivery, so long as consumer obtains a receipt. And it also has to contain a statement that within 10 days following the receipt of the notice of cancellation, all payments of any kind made by the consumer shall be refunded to the consumer. And then compensation in the wholesale transactions. Because wholesaling is a licensed real estate activity, all other laws and regulations applicable to real estate transactions apply, including compensation. Section 604 prohibits licensed salespersons and associate brokers from accepting commission or of any valuable consideration from anyone other than the real estate brokers with whom they are affiliated for licensed real estate activity. When a wholesaler sells their interest in a contract to a third party, the third party's payment must be paid to the broker. So that's the practice that's not seen up until now. Now, Uh, I have heard of a couple of situations that the wholesaler says, I'm not getting a license. I'm not getting a license. You have that situation, you can file a complaint with the real estate commission. You can verify if they've got a real estate license through the PAL system. And unlicensed real estate activity of any kind can be reported by filing a complaint with the real estate commission. So I am not going to hesitate on filing a complaint on a wholesaler that's not licensed. Because in most cases, the people, the sellers, the property owners that they're working for do not realize what they're doing. And that's the whole idea of this law. So then we get into frequently asked questions, and I'll answer any of your frequently asked questions, or try to. But so the bottom line is if you have a wholesaler that, in fact, this one person said, "Oh, I'm not a wholesaler." Well, what are you? And you know, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, it's probably a duck. So if you get that situation, number one, we're not taking listings from wholesalers. We're not taking listings from wholesalers. And if you get into a situation like I just described with one of our agents, now you're kind of trapped into it because it's in the MLS. Now, quite frankly, some MLSs do not allow them in. Lehigh Valley realtors do not allow wholesale listings in their MLS. And I think that all MLSs should do the same thing. But the Pocono apparently still allows them in their MLS, and all it's going to do is create more headaches for ourselves because you are going to run into those transactions. Now you got to deal with it because your buyer wants to see the property. So bottom line is, if you get in that situation, you've got to get your buyer to get with an attorney. You do not use any of PAR forms. No agreement of sale. They've got to get. It's got to be, and quite frankly, the wholesalers will have their own agreement of sale that they want your buyer to sign. And I think you have some experience with that, right, David?
Yeah, just one transaction I went through. And so, you know, the first thing I think is, you know, if you have a buyer and they want to get involved in a wholesale deal, they should have an attorney. Because, you know, like when you bring your forms to me for advice to review, I'm working on becoming an expert on our standard forms, but I'm not an expert on all these different agreement of sales forms that are going to come through from all these different agencies or wholesalers, right? And you know, they had their attorney write those forms, and on the basis of that, you know that those forms are going to be really, really heavily written in the favor of the wholesaler. You know, the one that I did up in like Goldsboro was, you know, the deposit was stated, it was not negotiable, the deposit was stated, and for any reason whatsoever, if the buyer backed out, the wholesaler got to keep the deposit, not the owner of the property, the wholesaler. And it just kind of went on and on from there. And I was able to negotiate certain aspects of that with them, to the point where my buyer said, I don't care, I'm going to buy it anyway. But I still thought even at that point, I still thought it was a pretty risky deal for him. You know, in terms of his security to keep his, you know, $10,000 deposit on like I don't know, $70,000 house or something like that. So, you know.
Now, this was prior to these new regulations, just to be clear.
Yeah, this is like probably 3 or 4 years ago.
seller, property.
I met with the seller about a year ago and oh, the little foamy is gone. Naked. Cover it up, it's gonna
You're
get
on a Zoom
cold.
call.
Anyway, we ended up not working together because I really couldn't help her. And, you know, she had been approached by a wholesaler, was interested in it. They had offered her a number for the house. And then the contract came. She sent it to me. I said, listen, I can't interpret this. This is nothing I'm familiar with. Get an attorney. No, I don't want to pay for the attorney. She was inherited a house. So she needed to unload it. The house needed everything. But it ultimately came down to like a bait and switch on the price that they were going to pay. And it was very geared towards the wholesaler. You know, she ended up doing it without an attorney. I mean, I don't really know the result of it,
Right.
but she called me in the end and was like thanking me for telling her, you know, but what she had agreed to versus what she accepted was like $30,000 off. So they offered her like a teaser number. And then when the contract came, they said they did their inspection. And as a result of the inspection, it was going to be considerably less. So she felt like she was locked in there.
Yeah.
So it hurts them, I think. Okay. So it's
Yeah.
just me.
Yeah, that's typically what they're looking for, is somebody that's desperate to sell, or somebody that just wants to, you know, get out of, I don't want to be bothered with it, or something of that nature. So again, if you have a buyer that stumbles on one of these houses, they have to have an attorney, and they have to have the attorney review the documents. Review the documents. It's not something that I'm going to review or David's going to review, because we're not going to take on that responsibility. We want all the responsibility left on that buyer and the buyer's attorney. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. Yep. Okay, any other questions or comments on wholesaling? Again, just you can go on PAR website. There's a webinar that was done with PAR's attorneys. And so it's good information. I don't want to dwell on it too much because we're just not going to deal with it, but I know that you need to be aware of what the wholesaling is and what our policies are as far as wholesaling.
I'm just wondering if they were a wholesaler would only have equitable title, they never have record owners. So how are they able to transfer their interest in the property if they don't have with only equitable interest?
Yeah, they get their fee, their amount off the settlement sheet. They get it off the settlement sheet. So the seller disclosure has to come from the original seller, not the wholesaler. So if you get in that situation and the wholesaler says, which I've had also, wholesaler, I don't have any seller disclosure and I don't know anything about the property. Well, then I told our agent, well, then they've got to go back to the real seller and have them complete a seller disclosure, because we can't sell the property without a seller disclosure. So, but the law does say, when you read in here, it does say that that seller does have to complete the seller disclosure.
Transfer when you have that third party corporate and they buy it the day of and it like 2 transfers happen on the same day. Is that, I'm trying to think of it, how it
Yeah,
works.
sometimes it is 2 transactions, so they're
Right.
closed on the same closed on the same day,
Mhm.
and sometimes in the same room.
Right.
And then the trick to that is there's 2 transfer taxes.
Yes, there is.
There's 2 transfer taxes
Yeah.
because it's 2.
But it's not wholesaling. It's just the process. The equitable interest is kind of like a corporate transfer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. So in one of the Facebook groups, looking for a realtor posts and 3,000 people comment, I went there for the comments. One of the first people that commented on it, so he did have a license. However, this person was looking for an off-market property to potentially purchase. And this realtor ended up attaching like a spreadsheet that he titled Pocket Listings. And he's like, I have all these off-market properties. So I'm like, okay. So like in that situation, like I end up briefing him on Facebook and seeing that he does have a real estate license. I think I saved the information because I was gonna ask you about it. Like if he's like tiling a pocket listing, like don't they have to be in the MLS?
Yeah, what I would do is, number one, he may have a real estate license. Does he belong, is he licensed with a broker? And do they belong to the MLS? And if they belong to an MLS, it falls under NAR's regs for clear MLS policy, and it has to be in the MLS. So you can't have pocket listings. That was a whole lawsuit, and that was the whole thing about the clear MLS that they went through, because people were pocketing. When you go back to the COVID days, it was very common where agents would just pocket the listings and say, well, I'm not going to put it in the MLS for a week or two. And then, as some of us know, then they pulled the trick of not uploading the seller disclosure, because you can't legally have a buyer sign an agreement of sale without reviewing and signing the seller disclosure first. So that was their way of stalling and getting in the MLS, and all of a sudden it's on the con. So yeah, that's I would check out further, because give it to me, and I'll be happy to check it out, because again, we follow by the rules, and somebody that's going to play the game and not follow by the rules, and I have no hesitation of turning them in. What's that? You fold up your listing agreement and you stick it in your pocket. Well, I just made a joke out of it, but that's really where the terminology came from, is that the agent gets a listing but doesn't put it in the MLS, just sticks the listing in his pocket or his briefcase and say, well, now I've got this listing that's off market, and I'm gonna sell it myself. So that was the whole thing. And certainly it's not fair game for agents that belong to the MLS and pay to go to the MLS. But the other bigger issue on that is that agent is not servicing their client and is not doing their fiduciary duty to their client, to their seller. And why I say that is, how do you get top dollar for a home? You get it out into the marketplace, right? You put it out there for lots of potential buyers to look at. If you keep that in your pocket and you go find your own buyer, that's not giving the seller the fiduciary duty that you're supposed to be giving them, because they're not getting the benefit of the full open market.
Someone can choose if the existing contract. If they can pick, this will not be for the MLS.
Yeah, they can pick it. And I'm just trying to think, is it in our listing agreement anymore? Okay. I will say that if I were encountering a seller that says, and I haven't had it for years, but I have had it, that does not want it in the multiple listing service, the first thing I tell them is, you're limiting your market. Because we all get, because we work with people, we have rapport with people, we have reputations with people, and they say, well, I want you to get the full commission, that's why I don't want you to put it in the MLS. And I always tell them, that's not my objective, and I'm not serving you best by that. And it doesn't matter to me whether I sell it or not. The important thing is that you get it on the market, you get as much exposure as you can, and let's get a buyer. So it doesn't matter to me whether I sell it or not. And I've always felt that way, because to do the best job for your seller, you have to give it as much exposure as possible. and keeping it to yourself or not. So, you know, I think that option was put in there years ago. Should it be in there now? I'm not so sure. Because, but it was put in there years ago when when I started in this business, MLS was just getting started. So we had open listings. Everybody had an open listing. There was no exclusive listings and there was no MLS. So a seller would list a property with 6, 7, 8, 10 people, different brokers, and whoever sold it got the full commission. That's an open listing. And then we came around with the MLS, or started the MLS up in Monroe County, and we had a gentleman's agreement. And keep in mind, back when I started, there was only 12 brokers in the county and 12 offices. So we had a gentleman's agreement that we would all work to get a exclusive listing. And if we couldn't get an exclusive listing, we wouldn't take the listing. And prior to that, we had a gentleman's agreement that the first person that got the open listing put their sign on it. So if you were the second person, it sign. So I mean, I'm just getting back to the point where there was some people back then that didn't want it in multiple listings because it was so new. They didn't want all these agents running through the house. So that, like I said, is an old rule. Maybe it shouldn't even be in the MLS or in the listing agreement anymore. But it's certainly not serving the seller at all by not keeping it there.
Reason why I asked if you touched on. In fact, we did the other week after, in the open house class, we were kind of touching on coming soons. And I know that's been a big point of contention for you as well. Is the coming
Well,
soon
the
and how it's
coming
done.
soon, yeah, the coming soon, and there was guidelines out of, again, the settlement, not the settlement we just had in August, but prior, few years ago on the clear MLS policy where agents had to put the listing in the MLS within 24 or 48 hours, depending on the reg. Had to have it on the MLS because they were trying to get rid of the pocket listings, and so that's why that all came about. Now that has matured a little bit now, and now we have situations. Well, I have a seller that I want to get it out there. So I'd like to have it on the MLS, but I really don't want it shown. So that's how when we had the open house, the Lehigh Valley, they have a
No showing.
yeah, that no showings until X whatever date. PMAR doesn't have it that way. They have a status that says active hold, which I think they're talking about the same thing. Where Lehigh Valley has now the key to that is whether you're doing it with the Lehigh Valley MLS or whether you're doing it with all MLS under active hold, you got to be very certain that that property is not shown to anybody, including yourself, until that date. And that's the good thing about Lehigh Valley having a date in there, because obviously it's there. So you cannot show it, because if you show it to anybody, then you're in violation of the MLS rules on Clear MLS. So that's why it can't be in there. But you know, especially as we're seeing more open houses, and we are promoting as an office, as a company, we're promoting open houses. We have a whole month of April is Paint the Town Red, and that is certainly a way to build momentum for your listing. So you list it on Monday and no showings until Sunday, and we have an open house on Sunday. So it builds up that agents can get that listing out to the buyers, potential buyers, and get them to come in. Just kind of creating demand for it. So that's how that's kind of evolving. Anything else? Okay. By the way, this wholesaling is nothing new. I, we had, people doing the same thing 30 years ago. It just wasn't as prevalent, but there were people that would buy up, houses back when we had a lot of foreclosures. And back in the early 80s, we had a lot of foreclosures back then too. People would come in and say, well, I'll buy the home and do the same process that they're doing right now. We didn't call them wholesalers back then. We just called them crooks. Okay, we good? Shall we get into contingent sale? So we're seeing, as I mentioned the other day, and does anyone need a handout? I think David pretty much got to everybody. We mentioned that we're seeing more contingent sales, and we're also seeing transactions. I'm signing escrow checks, giving the money back to the buyer because this house didn't sell. And so wanted to talk a little bit about it, and you know, kind of the pros and cons. You know, I've always been of the mindset that if I had a buyer that came into me and I did my initial consultation, and they said that they have a house that they have to sell, and do I have it on the market? Or do you have it on the market? No, I don't have it on the market yet. I just like to get see some homes, and I know my house will sell fast. I've never had anybody, nobody has ever told me that the house is going to take a long time to sell. I'm not sure why, but I've never had it happen. And so,
do take a long time.
right. So I would consult with them and suggest to them that, you know, if you want to look at a few homes to get an idea what your money will buy up here, I certainly understand that, and we'll do that. But after that, you need to get your home on the market, get it under contract, because right now you're not really a bona fide buyer, because you have to sell a property, and nobody has the crystal ball to say how long it's going to take to sell that property. And I did that. I've done that for years. And so I try to stay away from these contingencies that we have here. And PER created these because agents were trying, like some other ones, agents were trying to put the verbiage in there, agreement of sale or contingent upon, so they came up with these standard forms. And I still believe in that, but I understand also that agents say, well, you know, I've got a buyer here, and they have a house to sell, but it is you know, certainly a possible sale for me, and I don't want to do what Bob does and tells them to go home and list their property and get it sold and then come back to me. So because basically that's what I'm telling them to do. And so now we're very well, they're going to go off to somebody else. And I say to that is not if you keep in touch with them and you build a rapport. If you build a rapport with the people and have your good consultation, your first consultation is a good consultation with them, and you impress them that you know what you're doing, and now they go and they get their home on the market, they get it sold. Do you think they're going to go back to somebody that they don't even know? They're going to go back to the person that they had a rapport with. And I know, I think that's human nature. And I've had it happen many times through the years to do it that way. But we have forms because we get into those situations. Well, I really want to get it. I will say that there was a time when these forms were prevalent also, and that is back some years ago when houses were on the market for 2 and 3 years. And so back then we didn't talk about days, we talked about how many years was your house on the market. And so, but it was literally the average days on the market literally was the average days on the market was literally 7 or 8 months. So back then, we get a fish and we say, well, we got a fish on the line, maybe we'll try to keep him on the line. So we'll do a sale contingent for that reason. David?
Yeah, one of the challenging things as a listing agent, when you get an offer with this is almost always the houses that they're selling are in a completely different market. So we can't look that up and run comps on it. We have no idea if it's really reasonably priced. We have no idea if that's an active neighborhood in terms of sales. So it's, we're trying to advise as best we can our clients with something that's virtually under a hood that we have very little control over.
I would say that if it is my listing and an agreement of sale comes in with one of these contingencies with with 3 out of the 4 contingencies we're going to go with, I will, especially if I have decent activity on it, I'm going to recommend to my seller not to accept it with that contingency in there. Because I don't want the listing bogged up with having a contingency in there that the seller has 48 or 70, or buyers got 48 or 72 hours to see, or the seller does have 48, 72 hours to get, see if they can get a buyer, because that buyer, the next buyer that's coming in that door that wants to buy it today may not wait, because he also may have a second choice, and they don't want to lose that second choice in the market like we have today. So that's why I will typically recommend to my seller not to take it.
And if you're, you're marking your listing like active with a contingency, right? Active C. So how many of you regularly take buyers to listings that are marked active with C? Pretty much never, almost never, right? So that's, the seller may be allowed to market, and the seller a lot of times will say, well, can I continue marketing? But in a practical sense, it has very little value.
So those of you that don't show those listings, why don't you show them? Was that?
Of the contract.
Right. Go ahead.
What about in the case of the existing house being under contract?
They're existing, we're going to get into that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we'll get into that. What was the question you just asked?
Why don't you sell them?
Oh,
Why don't you show those?
I can do that at my age.
I'm in real trouble. I've been doing that for years.
I'll tell you the reason, I'm sure it's the same reason that those of you that said you don't show them, the same reasons I don't show them, is I don't want my buyer falling in love with that house, and now everything that they see after that, they compare it to that house, and it doesn't meet their expectations. Now they say, well, let's wait, and then I'm going by experience, is, well, let's wait and see what happens with that house, and because I'd really like to have that house. Now you have a buyer, and you may end up with no sale. But but I've also, as I said, buyer falls into that house, every house that you sell them is not going to be good enough for them because they love that one. I don't want to get my buyer into that situation.
Or the buyer might want to say, well, let's put a backup offer in.
Yeah.
So I'll let Bob speak to the backup offer.
Yeah, backup offers I do not recommend at all. And I've been after PMAR to get that verbiage out of there. Well, continue to show backup offers accepted. Backup offers is fraught for lawsuits because you have an outstanding agreement of sale out there, and number one is the seller cannot sign a second agreement of sale. They cannot sign a second agreement of sale. So what's the point of the backup offer? So you have to have verbiage in there. So I say if you're gonna do a backup offer, you have to have an attorney give you the verbiage to put in there. 'Cause I'm not gonna put the verbiage in on it. So backup offers should definitely stay away from. Yeah, look, the other downside for you working with a buyer that wants to put a backup offer in, now they're obligated to that backup offer. So how are you gonna show them another property and get them on the contract with another property? They got an offer already out there, so. Question? Active contingent. Yeah, you can go ahead and show active listings. That was a joke. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Okay, so the first form that we have, I'm gonna start out with the best one first out of the four. We have four addendums here, and let's start out with the best one. And that is settlement of other property contingency. And I think that was a question that we had back here is what if they have already have their house under contract? What if they already have their house under contract? They already have their house under contract. This is the addendum that you're going to use, because now the offer that they're putting in on your listing, it's subject to them completing settlement on their existing home. And if you're working with a buyer that is in that situation, you want to be sure that you use this addendum. That you use this addendum every time, because we have had a couple of situations, and fortunately they worked out. But a buyer had a house to sell, and the agent did not use this addendum. And what could have happened, and actually it did happen, is that it fell apart. The agreement sale on the buyer's house fell apart. Fortunately, they got another buyer right away. Had they not, they were obligated to buy that house because it was not contingent upon them having settlement. So that's why you have to use this one anytime you have a buyer. And if you have a buyer, and it's certainly one of your qualifying questions is, do you have do you own a home now? Is it for sale? Are you renting? But if they say, yes, I own a home now, is it for sale? Yes, it is for sale. Do you have it under contract? Yes, I have it under contract. Okay, then you need to use this form. So pretty self-explanatory. Sale is contingent upon you put the address of the property, and the property is under an agreement of sale with the settlement to take place on or before. Paragraph 2. Want to note a couple of things in this paragraph. Settlement of buyer's property does not occur by the settlement date specified above, or if buyer's agreement of sale is terminated, seller may terminate the agreement by written notice to buyer, and all deposit money paid to on account of purchase price will be returned to the buyer according to the terms of this agreement of sale, and agreement of sale will be void. Buyer and seller agree to extend the date by which settlement must occur until seller terminates this agreement. I want to emphasize that because this is another time that it is a unilateral termination. Unilateral is only one person can terminate. Buyer cannot say, well, my deal fell through, so I'm terminating the agreement because my deal fell through. Buyer doesn't have that option. This is only a seller option, and you do not need an extension. Not a bad idea to do, but you do not need an extension because it says that the buyer and seller agree to extend the date by which settlement must occur until the seller terminates. So you don't need to necessarily get an addendum done to extend this contingency, because it said the paragraph says that the buyer and seller do agree until the seller terminates.
Just one added thing to this, what you did touch on it, but buyer comes to you and says, I want to buy a house. I have my other place under contract. We're through the instructions or whatever it is, you want to get a copy of their agreement. You want to get, contact information so you can contact their realtor down in New Jersey, New York, DC, wherever they're coming from. Because you're gonna have to verify this, because as we are all, even brand new people, we're all very familiar. Sometimes things are not what they think they are. Sometimes people may, they're not necessarily trying to be dishonest, but they may have a different impression than what the reality is. So you want to get all the stuff so you can verify.
Yeah, and those are excellent points. You don't want to just take make the contingent, the agreement of sale contingent upon this addendum. You want to get a copy of the agreement of sale. And as David said, you want to follow up, just like Chris and a lot of you do with mortgage companies. Well, you get an offer from a buyer, you contact the mortgage company to see where they're at. You have to do the same thing with this, because the seller, your buyer may be thinking one thing and not understanding, well, that's not really where you're at in that agreement of sale. So you do need to do that. And I would also suggest that you follow up periodically with that agent in the buyer's agent selling their existing home. Is how's everything going? Everything good? Yeah, all inspections are good. Mortgage commitments in, we're good to go. Or, well, we're having a little bit of problem here with the mortgage. The buyers is a little shaky at this point. You need to know that. You need to relay it to your seller.
And also, when you reach out to these other agents, just as we do when in a normal transaction, if somebody's responsive or they're not responsive or they're rude or they're polite, we get a feeling for who are we going to have to work with and how this transaction might go along the way. So, if you call the buyer's agent and they're not getting back to you, that could be an extra challenge you're going to have to work with, or choose not to work with, for your seller.
The agents and you are working together, and then you could have an issue at the end where the financing, or I should say the funds from that sale, have to be conveyed to the title company here.
Right.
Everybody's working together.
Yep,
And they need to
absolutely.
be able to communicate, like you said. And sometimes you find out when you're really, really lucky that there's another deal that's contingent on that one.
That's right. Yeah.
I had that happen and it was awful. It was 3 in
Yeah.
a row, and it happened, but it was a lot of work. And fortunately, Command keeps us on track of all of our little things. We could put all of our contingencies in. So even with somebody else's contract, throw that in there so you can keep on top.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had an attorney, which actually was a friend, that some years ago, he was representing a seller, which is my seller, and took an agreement of sale and had this contingency in it. And he didn't want the seller to sign it. He didn't want the seller to sign it. He says, well, what happens if something falls apart there? He said, and I said to him, I said, Bob, I said, if I tell you how many deals I've closed with using this contingency, I said, if you're looking for somebody with no contingency in it, I said, you're letting a good buyer go here. So he agreed then to let the seller sign it. But sometimes you have to educate the attorneys too. And don't be afraid. Yeah. Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. A very motivated buyer, because it's not a tenant that has a month-to-month lease and can buy today, tomorrow, or next year. It's a seller that needs to move. Right. Yep, absolutely. And then just the last paragraph, I know they have it on all of it. The terms of the addendum of this addendum change and prevail over the provision of the mortgage contingency clause, giving seller the right to terminate the agreement of sale if buyer's mortgage commitment is conditioned upon the sale and settlement of buyer's property. So when you get a buyer with a mortgage contingency, the agreement of sale says that commitment in the pre-printed, in the agreement of sale, it says that the commitment has to come through with no contingency on, selling another property, settlement on another property. That's why this paragraph's in there. This paragraph overrides that pre-printed in the agreement of sale. Just a tidbit.
Just to clarify, this is saying that this whole sale cannot be completed until the contingency is gone, like that house is sold.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's contingent. So if something happened to the buyer's transaction on the home that they're selling, then the agreement of sale is contingent upon them. So now you've got to work out either another negotiation or whatever. But the buyer can put the house right back on the market and get another buyer. So those are the things that you communicate with. Kristen was saying, you communicate because just because their deal fell through does not void out this contingency, because it says that the seller has to terminate it. Okay. Anything else on that one? The shortest, the best, the one we like the most. Okay.
Like many things, the least amount of words, the better off you are.
Yeah, right. Okay, so the second one is sale and settlement of other property contingency with the right to continue marketing and timed kickout clause addendum to the agreement of sale. This is the longest named form we have in our program. So it's the right to continue marketing. Right to continue marketing. So it's contingent upon the agreement of sale is contingent upon the sale and settlement of buyer's property at address. Buyer's property is currently listed for sale or will be listed for sale within blank days, 2 if not specified, of seller's acceptance of the agreement of sale. So you've got that buyer that doesn't even have their house on the market yet. They want to put an offer in on a home up here. You might use this one. And it goes on to say that the buyer will do what's reasonably necessary to sell and settle buyer's property, including but not limited to authorizing broker to list buyer's property with a multiple listing service, and so on. Buyer's property will be listed at or below blank dollars for the term ending on or after. This is what David was talking about. They can put a number in there, but you don't know really whether that's a good marketable price, good saleable price. But that is also one, if they don't have it listed, well, Mr. Buyer, who are you listing it with? Well, I'm not sure yet. I've talked to a couple of realtors. Well, let me know as soon as you have it listed so that I can communicate with that listing agent. Then you have a conversation with the listing agent of their house and say, well, where are you at in price? Do you feel it's reasonably priced? What's the condition of the house? What's the marketability? What's the average days on the market in your area? Those type of questions you want to ask. Right, Kristen? I refer back to Kristen because she asks the questions and follows up. In a good way. And paragraph 4 is buyer acknowledges that seller has the right to continue to offer seller's property for sale to other prospective buyers. Paragraph 5, if a buyer receives a bona fide offer for buyer's property, buyer will promptly notify seller in writing by providing a copy of the agreement of sale for buyer's property within blank days, 2 if not specified, of receiving the copy of the agreement of sale for buyer's property. Seller will inform buyer in writing that seller at seller's sole discretion. Now, just a just a side note there, I would not leave that 2 days blank. I would put in probably 3 to 5 days in there because you're the one that's going to be getting the agreement of sale. Now, supposedly you don't have a chance or you can't get to the seller. And then 2 days, because we're going to read on, 2 days, if the, leave it at 2 days and the seller does not respond, he's accepting that agreement of sale. So because that agreement of sale may be what Kristen's talking about. They may get an agreement of sale on their property, and it's contingent upon that buyer selling their property. Well, maybe your seller doesn't want to go along with that. So that's why they've got the right to review it. So within the blank days, seller will inform in writing at seller's sole discretion, one, accepts the agreement for sale for buyer's property or rejects the agreement of sale for the buyer's property. Seller's written rejection must contain the specific reasons for rejection to allow the buyer an opportunity to renegotiate the agreement of sale. So the seller can't just say, I don't like it, and so I'm not accepting that. So they've got to tell you, and you want to know why. What don't you like? Well, it's depending upon their buyer selling, or it may be something in terms of that agreement. So they got to put it in writing. Seller has not within the time stated in paragraph 5A of this addendum respond to the buyer's notice. Seller accepts the agreement of sale for the property. You okay, David? Do you have anything there? You go.
So far, so good.
Okay. Within blank hours, 24th not specified, of receiving written notification that the seller rejects the agreement of sale for the buyer's property, buyer may provide. They only have 24 hours to do it, or you could put 48 or 96 or 360 hours. Written proof of buyer's financial ability to proceed without the sale and settlement of the property. Typically, that's not going to happen. If they've got the ability to buy it, they're not going to write this contingency in there. Or a copy of the renegotiated or new agreement of sale for the buyer's property containing the terms that are acceptable to the seller. The seller rejects the same verbiage. Seller rejects the renegotiated. They have to give reasons why, and seller will have 24 hours, if not specified, to respond to buyer's renegotiated agreement of sale. So you can see the timing is pretty tight there, and you want it tight because everything's got to keep moving. But also, as you always hear me say, be careful of those dates and the timing, because it always defaults if it's not done within the time period, the seller is accepting it. And we can. Oh, we didn't know. Probably.
We got a request from that Zoomer. We got a request from Milford to share.
Yeah, we can go in on KRs. Yeah, we can do that. We can do that. No, I didn't pull them up. Right.
These forms, in the meantime, as you will see going forward, and you can kind of see already, just the nature of these forms are, I think, a great incentive for a buyer to have their property under contract before they step forward, because the sellers really has a lot of control. The seller has a lot of options and ways to, kick out the buyer on these, right? So, if the buyer is working to get their house sold, but it's not really as far along as, the SOP form would indicate, the buyers, kind of at risk too. They put, they've gone forward and maybe they're starting to do inspections and things like that, and things go south with the first domino and, on and on and on. So it's, really a lot of incentive actually for the buyer to make their offer stronger by getting the primary home currently under agreement.
Okay,
So the buyer has an agreement to sell for the selling their house. But then they go through the inspections and then their buyer doesn't want to proceed after getting the inspections. So they either have to find a new buyer in that time frame. Oh, okay. So then, but the seller who's, who the buyer's trying to sell their house, they read that standard agreement. They only have a certain amount of time to agree to the buyer's agreement. What if that's after the time it takes the buyer seller to cancel on the inspection? Does that make sense?
who's on first?
Huh? Right, because so they have an agreement and he has so much time to agree to that agreement. But so it's like one day left and then they find out that they're gonna fall through, but they already agreed to it and they lost what happens then?
Well, I mean, it's just, like, we like this first form they did. That's the best form, right? So even within that first form, well, did you just go under contract yesterday? Or did you get through inspections? And how's the mortgage contingency coming along? Is everybody, you have a settlement date? Did everybody agree on everything? So the more of those boxes you have checked, the stronger your offer can be. The fewer of those, even though you're using the best form, the fewer of those things that we find out about causes the listing agent more concerned with how strong is this offer.
So as a listing agent, you don't want to agree on a buyer until the agreement itself has been going through for quite some time. Until
Okay.
most of those boxes are checked.
Well, not on this form. Because this is contingent upon them selling their house and getting under contract.
Mhm.
Okay? This form, as David had mentioned, on this form, so now you get a offer on your listing, and it has the settlement of other property contingency in there. Before I would have my seller sign that agreement of sale, I would talk with the listing agent and ask the question that David just went through. Where are you at? Has the inspections been done? Where are you at with the mortgage? Can you tell me who the mortgage lender is? So you have all that to go back to your seller when you're asking them to sign an agreement of sale. So you give them all that knowledge. Now, with this one and the rest of them, you don't have that option because it's contingent upon them finding and getting that offer on it. So that's where it says, now it's contingent upon them getting an agreement of sale. Once they have that agreement of sale, then it has to be presented to your seller. You have to present it to your seller and go over that agreement of sale with your seller and look at the high points, look at the low points, and then the seller has the right, which you're going to be consulting them on. The seller has the right to say, no, I don't like that agreement of sale and I'm not accepting it. And here's the reasons, A, B, and C. I can't just say I'm not accepting it. Here's my reasons I'm not accepting. Then you go back to the buyer agent goes back to him and says, well, the seller's not going along with this agreement, so we have to negotiate these points. Now, if they negotiate the points and they get it to the point that the seller is satisfied, it's resubmitted to them, and then the seller again, will either accept or reject, and I would expect that if they took care of the concerns, the seller would accept it.
Okay.
That's kind of the gist of what we're going through here.
That they've agreed to, this form is now in full force and effect. But now the deal for that person falls apart some way. So then I'm confused. I never used this form, so I'm just trying to understand it.
Yeah.
So what, so if that person, so once they've agreed to it, okay, we're good, we're moving forward, but ooh, now something happened with that buyer's house that they're selling. You know, things didn't go right, it didn't appraise, whatever. Where's the back out of that? I'm just not understanding.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I'll try to find an answer for it. Oh, absolutely. So now you get an offer that's acceptable to the seller, and then they sign this addendum. And then they agree to it. Yeah, it really. Mm-hmm. The seller could terminate. Yeah, if, let's look at paragraph 6. If buyer's property is not under contract of agreement of sale with terms acceptable to seller on or before, seller may terminate the agreement by written notice to buyer with all deposit monies on account of purchase price being returned to the buyer according to the terms of the agreement. This agreement shall, seller's right to terminate continues until buyer's property is under an agreement of sale, terms acceptable. So that's kind of the same as what we had in the other one. We put a date in there that has to be under contract. If it's not, it doesn't automatically stop. It doesn't terminate until the seller terminates it. So, you know, I would probably say, Kristen, because it really doesn't address your situation, but certainly can happen, that's for sure. And I think it's communication, and I'd go back, communication between the buyer's agent and yourself and saying, well, the deal fell apart, and now where are we at? Where do we start? It still could then drop back to, well, now they still have more days to get it under contract. So they could get it under contract again. Because if the buyer's property is not under an agreement of sale with terms acceptable to seller, so it could fall back, terminates, but you still have, buyer still has time to get another contract on it. Agents are using it now.
Please vote, please don't, it's one or the other.
Well,
If it falls through, then you can still have the other one say, well, his house didn't sell, so I can terminate lease because whatever. If you have both of them,
both of which,
this form and the first form, contingency.
yeah,
You can do
you're
that.
not going to use the first form if you're using this one. Okay.
Yeah, you're covered.
What's that?
You only need one form.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that paragraph 6.
Yes. You get the microphone over here. You're slipping.
Where my client's house went under contract and then we went to find a house. They found a house. We used the first form because it was already under contract. And then the buyer from my seller's house, MIA, gone. So now my seller is panicking because she really wants the other house. And basically what it came down to was me and the other agent talking, and me understanding that the seller of the other home did not want to go back on the market because it was 2021 and have all the people coming in and all the stuff. So she was willing to wait. So we were able to find another buyer because it was a hot market and everything went through.
Communication is
Communication was
Absolutely.
the key.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, yes, we had to do an extension for the closing dates because now everything was different. Well, that one terminated, I should say. That first contract is because the buyer's MIA is gone. So that terminated. So now we have a total new contract. But our contract had to be extended and pushed out the closing date because now we're dealing with a whole different
Yeah.
buyer.
And just like all these forms, right, the first form is the strongest. Effectively is the strongest offer, right? You know, it's, you gotta look at the big picture, like what's their offer like to begin with? You know, has your seller's house been on the market for a long time? Do they want too much money for it and we can't get any more price reductions or something like that? Is this buyer willing to pay a lot of money for this house to make it, to make it worthwhile? Do they have an appraisal contingency as part of their offer to make their offer more worthwhile? There's a lot of moving parts. And it might be worth it to do some of these if all the conditions are in place. That's kind of what this is for.
Right, right. So now we took care of paragraph number 6. Now we're getting to paragraph 7. So far, paragraph 6 is all for your buyer or for the buyer. But now the hairy part comes in for the buyer. If seller receives a bona fide offer from a different prospective buyer with terms acceptable to seller will promptly notify buyer in writing of seller's receipt of that acceptable offer and seller's intent to terminate this agreement of sale. Within blank hours, 24 if not specified, of receiving written notification that seller has received a bona fide offer with terms acceptable to seller, buyer will provide written proof of buyer's financial ability to proceed without the sale and settlement of buyer's property or a copy of an agreement of sale for buyer's property. So it's only 24 hours. It's not much. So again, I would not leave that blank. But what that's saying is now you've got your the buyer. You're working with the buyer and you're using this agreement right now. Now you get another offer comes in that the seller wants to accept. You got 24 hours for your buyer, which I would put in there at least 72 hours. But they've got 72 hours to supply written proof. And I will tell you that if you have a buyer that can buy without selling their property, but they still want to use this agreement, don't wait for that offer to come in and get written proof. Get written proof ahead of time so that you're ready to give it to the seller or the seller's agent. Or they have to provide a copy of an agreement of sale on the buyer's property. Buyer fails to respond within the time stated in this paragraph, this agreement of sale is terminated. All deposit monies will be returned to the buyer according to the terms of the agreement. Within 2 days of receiving written proof of buyer's financial ability to proceed with the sale and settlement of the buyer's property or receiving a copy of an agreement of sale, seller will inform the buyer that seller at seller's sole discretion accepts the written proof or accepts the agreement of sale or terminates the agreement. They still can terminate. Because think about it, the second offer might be higher in price, might be better terms. So could be different reasons why the seller would just want to terminate. So. Okay. Anyone going to use this one? It's a tough one. I would try to, again, I've already explained what my position is on and how I work with buyers, but But I would try to stay away from the 48-hour pickup clock. That's the one, that addendum was the one that I was talking about. Well, now you've got a buyer, but now there's a 48-hour or 72-hour kickoff clause. Another buyer may say, no, I'm not gonna even look at the house because I got a second choice, but I don't want that second choice to slip away.
And not only that, but you know, we're in this class to learn about this form. Imagine you get that form in an offer, and you have to explain this to your seller. Right? I mean, just going through an agreement of sale sometimes can be challenging. And then you're gonna throw this on top of it. So,
I joked when I said who's on first, but this addendum is almost like that. I mean, as you working it through and explaining it to your seller, it's almost, well, who's on first, the buyer or the seller? All right, so the next one is SSP-CM, sale and settlement of other property with the right to continue marketing addendum to the agreement of sale. The agreements of sales contingent again on property address. Buyer acknowledges that seller has the right to continue to offer seller's property for sale to other prospective buyers. In the event seller accepts an agreement of sale for seller's property from another buyer, this agreement is terminated. There's no back and forth at all. They accept another offer, this agreement is terminated. Seller will immediately notify buyer in writing of the termination and deposit money paid back to the buyer. Seller's right to market the property and accept another offer of sale will cease upon seller's written approval of the terms or conditions of an agreement of sale for buyer's property. Seller's right to continue marketing property is renewed if buyer's agreement of sale is terminated. This one kind of addresses what you had talked about. It didn't address it in the other one. So what it's saying is that the seller's right to market the property and accept another offer of sale will cease upon seller's written approval of terms and conditions of an agreement of sale for buyer's property. So it's contingent upon them selling the property. They got an offer on it, and now this addendum ceases at that point. The seller's right to continue marketing property is renewed if the buyer's agreement of sale terminated. So going back to what Kristen asked on the other document is what happens if that form, if that first agreement falls through? Well, now in this one, it says that it's renewed. So now it goes back into effect, right? Goes back into effect. And if buyer's property is not under an agreement of sale with terms acceptable to seller on or before blank days, or if seller's agreement of sale is terminated, seller may terminate the agreement by written notice to buyer and all deposit monies paid on account of the purchase price. And under the terms, seller's right to terminate continues until buyer's property is under an agreement of sale. So we haven't touched on it, but what kind of dates would you put in there? What kind of dates would we put in under paragraph 5 there? I would suggest if you have one of these, is try to stretch out your closing a little further on your buyer's agreement of sale. Stretch out the closing to give the buyer an opportunity to sell their property. So what I'm saying is I would not put in 3 weeks or 30 days or something like that. I would try to stretch it out to give the buyer maybe 60 days to get their house under contract. Now you're stretching out the settlement date on the property they're buying here. You're stretching that out, but I think again that's negotiable. But I would want to try to stretch it out some so that you give a period of time that the buyer has an opportunity to get it.
we may try to find out what's the average day on the market in that neighborhood where they're selling the house. Information that we could use.
Right.
Like you want to lock it down.
Right.
You don't want the seller to accept anything else. Wouldn't you just tell your seller, don't accept any of these? Like, let's, if they're in that much of a hurry and are that confident, get under contract and then we'll get the first form, and then it'll be great, right?
That's what I do.
Okay, that's what I do too.
Right. Yeah, yeah, no, that's where I would, other than the first one, yeah. Other than that, if I'm representing the seller, I'm gonna recommend, let the buyer go get their, home sold, get it under contract and then come back. I don't want to muddy the waters up by having a contingency of them selling their house. And we're going through those gyrations. And the point that David made, especially on the first one, if you're going to have your seller sign the kickout clause in, make sure that you understand it and you explain to them what they're signing so they understand it, because it is literally back and forth and almost who's on first. So,
And the more you know about the other offer,
right, absolutely.
go in like loaded, right? Like, because your seller's gonna ask you a lot of questions. They're gonna wanna know everything about the other offer, so find out ahead of time before you go in there, so you have to speak about what is going on the other side. There's no mistake he started out with the first form.
And I'm going to end with the worst one. Number 4, and the worst one for your seller. And that's sale and settlement of other property contingency addendum to the agreement of sale. This one is clear that the seller cannot continue to market it. The seller's going to take off the home off the market until, and giving a time period for the seller to sell or the buyer to sell their home. So this one I certainly would not recommend to the buyer, to the seller. This one is very much good for the buyer, definitely not good for a seller. Agreement of sales contingent upon the sale and settlement of properties, buyer's property address, buyer property is same we had in the other one. Buyer's property is currently listed for sale or will be listed within blank days of seller's acceptance. And just that paragraph's the same as we went into the one with the kickout clause. Buyer's property is or will be listed at blank. If buyer receives a bona fide offer for the buyer's property, buyer will promptly notify seller in writing by providing a copy of the agreement of sale. Within 2 days, if not specified, of receiving the agreement of sale, buyer's property seller will inform the buyer whether they're going to accept it as seller's sole discretion. Same as what we had in the previous two. Within blank hours, if receiving written notification that seller rejects the agreement of sale for buyer's property, written proof of buyer's financial, same verbiage. Copy of a renegotiated agreement, same verbiage. Seller will have blank hours to respond to buyer's renegotiated or new agreement of sale for buyer's property. After blank, if buyer's property is not under contract for sale, the seller may terminate this agreement. So there's nothing in here that says that the seller can continue to market, the seller can do anything. It's contingent upon then contingent upon the buyer getting a buyer for the property, and then the seller does have the right to accept or reject it, but he can't continue to market, he can't continue to do anything with it. So best for a buyer, worst for a seller. Depends on which hat you're wearing. But the other point, I guess, is do you want to go through all these gyrations with a buyer and then it falls through and then you get another one? You really don't. As I started out when I started out, I said you really don't have a bona fide buyer if they have to sell their house. They're not really a qualified buyer, right? If they're not in a position to purchase, they're not really a bona fide. So do you want to spend time? Do you want to spend time showing houses and then writing up a contingency, that deal falls through, and now you do it again. So that's the question you have to ask yourself, and whether you want to do that or not. Personally, I do not. Anything to add, David?
Sounds good to me.
To sell their house. Isn't it a good idea to maybe connect them with a lender who could offer them bridge loan financing?
Mhm.
So that way they can be a bona fide buyer right now, they could buy and then just close the gap when they finish, purchasing and then selling. That's
Absolutely.
a good option, because the problem is a lot of these people are worried about not finding something because the
Right.
inventory is so bad.
Yep.
So rather than using these forms, maybe a bridge loan might be the option.
Okay, any questions on any of those?
Booty question. Which is Bob's favorite form? Nobody could answer that?
So what are, since we have a little time, don't like to let anybody out early. Since we have a little time, let's go over a couple of other addendums. That are there, and sometimes they are necessary. Promote them, but I can't say that I have not used them, because I have. Because you get the situation, this is post-settlement addendum to the, post-settlement possession addendum to the agreement of sale. So this is where you have a situation where settlement is for March 30th, and this, your seller cannot get out by March 30th. They need till April 15th to get out. Many reasons why they may need that extra time, but they need till April 15th. Buyer does not want to extend the agreement of sale. The buyer says, no, I need to settle because I'm going to lose my rate, my mortgage lock-in. I'm going to lose it. I need to settle. I need to settle. That's probably the typical situation I've used this form the most in, is buyer doesn't want to lose his lock-in, and seller can't get out for, as I said, any number of reasons. And of course, just the fact that the seller doesn't want to get out in time does not make it the reason to use it. But there are times when it comes into play, but only use it. Don't use the next couple of forms. Don't use it unless you really are backed up against the wall. Really need to use it, but it is an opportunity to keep a transaction together. And so this says post settlement. So that means after settlement, the seller's still going to be there. You're having settlement, but the seller's going to still be in the house. So it says that the form is not a lease agreement, not a lease agreement. It is an addendum to the agreement of sale between buyer and seller, in which buyer gives seller the right to continue to occupy the property after settlement. Buyer and seller acknowledge that this addendum does not create a landlord-tenant relationship. This form is not recommended to be used for periods that exceed 30 days. So now I just said they got to settle by March 30th, and now the seller cannot be out until the 5th of May. We're beyond that 30 days. You cannot use this addendum. Now it becomes a lease. Anything after 30 days is a leasehold. It's a lease. You have to use a lease. You cannot use this addendum. So it's meant for short term. And typically those situations are short term. Typically, I've had, a week, actually I've had a couple of days that the seller, seller just could not get stuff out. They're selling on Friday. They can't be out till Monday. We do it for a couple of days. So that's typically it's,
Like a delay with a movie company or something like
yeah, exactly, exactly. Yep. So the vacating date, it says the seller will vacate the property on or before. Occupancy fee, seller will pay buyer an occupancy fee, a blank per day from settlement to the date seller vacates the property. Seller shall pay the fee at or before settlement. The fees will be paid directly to buyer unless buyer directs otherwise. So what would be a typical occupancy for you're staying 5 days? What's a per diem? Per diem is per day. What would be a fee? To take, it's whatever buyer and seller were. I've had situations say, buyer and seller got along through, they got to be in there for 3 days. Buyer just says, forget it. I'm not concerned about it. As long as they're out by Monday, I'm okay with that. But I've also had a couple week period where the buyer says, and fair, buyer says, I want to be, I want per diem for the amount of my mortgage, my taxes, and my insurance. And that's typically how we come up with a per diem. So we don't just pull a number out of the air. That's typically a buyer will say, I just want to be covered my expenses because I can't live in the property. Fair, right? But that's typically what I do there. Deposits in addition to the occupancy fee, seller will pay buyer a security damage deposit in the amount of blank, which will be held by the buyer until vacating date. Within 30 days of vacating date, buyer will refund the deposit provided seller is not in default of the agreement of sale. So is it wise to get a security deposit? Is it wise? Yeah, I think it's wise. What happens if the movers come in and they put a piece of furniture through a wall? If you don't have some security deposit there to repair that wall, the buyer's got to repair the wall. So I think a security deposit is fair there. As much as you can get. No, I would, I've used $1,000. I've had 1,500 to, I don't think I've ever done one less than 1,000. Huh? No, that's security. This is with security deposit. So that's in case, as I said, which does happen, is movers do some damage to the wall, or I've had one situation where they punched a hole in the wall because they had a big piece of furniture that the movers it got out of their hands and went through the wall. So yeah, I think that's fair. So, and typically the seller's getting proceeds, right? We're having settlements, so the seller's getting proceeds, so they got some money. I hope. Property inspection, buyer will inspect the property within 2 days after seller vacates the property. Seller or utilities, seller will pay shall pay from settlement through the vacating. That's electricity. Typically, we don't change the electricity over. Electricity stays in the seller's name. And if you have water, gas, the same thing. Pets allowed on the property after settlement as follows. Well, if the pets were there before settlement, I guess they ought to stay there after settlement, right? So.
I will not use a check. They have to give me like a certified type of funds. I won't use a check because they can go, and then you're just stuck with the check. They can close the account. They can
for the security deposit.
for the security deposit.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually, it does not hurt for both, quite frankly. But that money is being paid directly to the buyer. So the buyer can say, okay, I'll take a personal check. That's up to the buyer. But you're representing the buyer. it would be good to say, well, we need a bank check, a cashier's check for that.
Yeah.
Good point, very good point. Or cold cash.
So none of this has to go through like the closing costs or any.
No, no. This is strictly between the buyer and seller. We don't get involved with it. Monies are paid at settlement for the per diem and for the security paid right directly. But I will tell you that if the seller doesn't move out, you're gonna get a. So that part of it you don't get out of. And it just talks about seller's not gonna make any changes to the property. Property insurance gets into that the seller will understand that the buyer's insurance does not cover. Sellers has to provide their own insurance cover. Typically, they'll just extend their homeowners insurance by a few days. Seller must have insurance policy providing for blank dollars in contents and blank dollars in liability. So it might be 100,000 and 300,000. It might be 100,000 and 500,000, depending on what their policy said. But as I said, the ones that I have done, the seller just extended their homeowners insurance policy. But
if the, if it was settled, it really is somebody else's property.
well, that's a very good point, Cheryl. What I didn't say is the seller, the buyer should still have their own insurance on it. Because if the home's not any longer in their name, no longer in their name, the seller's insurance is not going to cover it. So the reason they extend it is for the personal property in case there's fire or something like that. It covers it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. But they still should. You know, by the way, and it's in the agreement of sale, and we don't have too many buyers that do it, and I'm not sure how many agents that explains it, but it does in our agreement of sale, it states in there that upon signing the agreement of sale, execution of the agreement of sale, buyer is recommended to get their insurance at that time. Because again, they've got an ownership in that property. You've got equitable ownership. Have you done that? Yeah, good. Very good. Okay. The seller shall receive a set of keys or combinations to permit entry into the property during occupancy. Yeah. In one of those paragraphs, you have to scratch your head. Don't they already have keys? And it gets into seller's default, the dates and times for the performance or any obligation to the addendum are hereby agreed to be of essence. Should seller violate or fail to fulfill and perform under any other terms and conditions of this addendum or the agreement of sale, seller will immediately vacate the property, removing all property. Buyer has the option of retaining security deposit, damage to deposit to apply to unpaid fees, damages, or other sums. And in the event the buyer institutes legal proceedings to recover sums due and owing under the terms of the addendum, or to seller or to have seller removed from the property, seller will pay those expenses. You know, one thing I did on one of these, some years ago, we put in a fee here for I don't remember the days, and it doesn't matter, but say that the seller needed to stay there for 5 days. The per diem was what we talked about: mortgage, insurance, and taxes. But then I put in there, because I was representing the seller, then I put in there that the per diem would increase after that initial 5 days. It would triple. It would triple. So say the fee was $150 after 5 days, it increased per day to 450 days. $450. Anyone know why I wanted to do that? Exactly. Ex- Exactly. 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 Well, I think if I recall, I just put a slash and just handwrote it in there. I was, and obviously on that one, I was representing the buyer. And I didn't want my buyer to get stuck with, them not getting out. So you gotta give them a real good incentive to get out. So triple the amount.
Triples every 5 days.
Yeah, right. Okay, so that's that. Let's go back. See where I'm at here now. I have one more and we'll do it quick. There it is. Pre-settlement possession. We probably get into this one more often. By the way, this is PAR's website where I go for all the forms. So you'll see that when you bring the form up, it says download view guidelines. Most of them have guidelines for you to use. And releasing on April 1st, 2025. So they got a new one, an update coming out. So the neat thing about when you see that, there's some new verbiage put in. When you pull up these, those, what they call marked up documents, it's great because now we see that this one's coming out April 1st in a few days. So now I want to see what are the changes that they make in that form. So the neat thing about it is it's color coded. So anything in red is new verbiage. Anything you see in blue is moved. It was in the document, but they moved it. And black is just what was there. So the new one on this, and this is pre-settlement possession addendum. I forget, I was just at a task force meeting out at Harrisburg the other day, and I can't remember why they said they had to do this. It's something to do with a law, because typically PAR only updates their forms July 1 and January 1. However, if a law is enacted that they've got to make a change, then they'll do it sooner. That's why this was being done in April to comply with that law. New verbiage says buyer understands and agrees that buyer has waived and given up the right to a notice to quit. Notice to quit is when a landlord puts a note on your door and says, get the hell out. That's quitting. D is parties are advised to consult legal counsel to ensure that they fully understand the relationship that this agreement creates. Oh, let's go back. That's the changes. Again. Now this one, the last one said 30 days, right? Not to exceed 30 days. Post settlement, not to exceed 30 days. This one says, this form is not recommended to be used for periods that exceed 14 days. Seller gives buyer possession of or access to the property before the date of settlement under the following terms and conditions. And again, this form we use, there's times when you need to use it, but use it with caution and only use it when you have to. But we all get into situations where, look, I got to be out of my apartment by the 30th of the month. We're not having settlement until the 10th of the month. I want to move my personal property. For example, furnishings, and physically occupy the property. So that's not just moving the furniture in, they're living in it. So that's what they're going to do. That's the one you check off. I don't like that one. Let me tell you why I don't like it. Why don't you like it, Mom? Because once they get in the house, they find every little thing to pick apart that they want before they have settlement. That's why I don't like buyers in. I mean, not every buyer, but I've had that experience. So that's why I don't like it. But not to say that I have not gotten into that situation. Store personal property without physically occupying the property. That's the one where I got to be out. I'll go in a motel for a week or two, and that's a good alternative. You can move your furnishings in, but go get a motel. You're not staying there. But I've also had situations where that's what they said, and they moved in anyway. I have something similar to that not too long ago, David, one of our agents.
Yeah, we had a closing on Friday. And that went over, the funds will transfer on Monday. So that'll be, when you actually get possession. Distributed. So the seller went over to get their laundry out of the dryer and found that the buyer changed the locks on the door, had moved all the furniture in. So, they couldn't get into the house, they couldn't get their clothes out of the dryer. And it wasn't the buyer's house yet. And the papers were signed, but the money didn't transfer, so it's not really their house yet.
And I don't remember on this one, or it might have been another one. One thing to remember, you're representing the seller. Do not allow the buyer to have the keys until the checks are dispersed at the settlement table.
And in this case, the seller left the keys on the counter.
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, the seller left the keys on the counter. The listing agent didn't know that the keys were in the house. And the buyer agent didn't see the buyer pick up the keys off the counter when they went through the walkthrough. So the buyer had the keys.
Yeah.
And they didn't wait till Monday to move into the house.
So again, something to tell your sellers, bring all the keys to settlement, or if they're not attending settlement, to give them to you. Don't leave them in the house. I'm not sure whether they knew at that point whether it was a dry close. Yeah.
I would think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been in a dry close and it's pretty thoroughly explained.
So they knew they
Yeah. Yeah.
Premeditated. Wait, you said that on a microphone.
When they say a dry closing, it's very dry, because the seller doesn't get their money and you don't get your money. So that's why you don't, until everybody has their money, and taking our side away from it, till the seller has their money, they don't own that house yet. Yes, Danny.
So you were saying, I can't read it. It was like option one where like they move their personal property and themselves
Yes.
into the home.
Yeah.
So could you technically do like a pre-settlement walkthrough saying the buyer accepts the property
yeah.
as is?
Absolutely. And you want to do
And then
that.
it covers your ass for
Yep. And you want to do that. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Good idea.
They're going to do if they're going to move in, they're going to do their walkthrough, and they're accepting the property So you're gonna do the, I just wanted to see whether it was in here or not. No, okay. So if you have a buyer that's gonna move in a few days ahead of time, you're gonna do, the buyer's gotta do their walkthrough and sign off on the walkthrough that they're accepting the property. Don't let them in without it. Okay.
Sounds like a gold card commercial.
Yeah. So storing the property, store personal property in the following areas without physically occupying the property. So I've had that situation. Seller says, you can't put you can't put your furnishings in the house, but you can put it in the garage, only in the garage. I don't have time, but I'll tell you a good story on that one sometime.
You put them on the front yard with a tarp over it.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go. And the other time that you would use this form is the last one. It says, make repairs or improvements to the property in a workmanlike manner as follows. So that means that they're not going to occupy, they're not going to move in, but you have a situation where FHA mortgage, for instance, that something has to be repaired or the deck's got to be painted or something of that nature. And the seller says, I'm not doing anything. Here, the seller's giving them the right to go in and do that work and do it in a workmanlike manner. So don't just say, if you're representing the seller, don't just say, well, they just want to go in and do that. Get them to sign one of these forms because that's what they're agreeing to and that's what they're doing. Because the other thing you could end up just as David, well, I'm just going to make the repairs, but I needed all my furniture to be able to do that.
Which brings up like another point, on that one, say you have something like it's an FHA loan, like Bob gave this example, and your buyer is willing to do a repair because the seller doesn't want to, it might be something like power wash and paint the deck.
Right.
Right. It might be something like put a handrail down to the basement, something like that. But you want to be cautious and with your buyers to go in and spend a lot of money and do a lot of work on somebody else's house, because if that falls through, it's gone. They just did a home improvement on somebody else's house and they're not getting it back.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're representing a buyer and they do that, that's an excellent point. You got to make it, understand that you're going to make the repairs, but if we don't go to settlement, the seller's got your repairs. Right. Right. Yep. And it says that the possession date is buyer have access to the property and put in a date there. In the event settlement does not take place, buyer's right of possession and access ends, and buyer will remove all personal property and will vacate the property no later than 5 p.m. on the second day after settlement in the agreement of sale or any extension thereof. Then you get into the occupancy fee. That's something that you can come up with again, like we talked about before, deposit money, same situation. Who's going to take care of the utilities for that time? Now, keep in mind, it's only 14 days. So beyond that, we need to do a lease. The maintenance will maintain the property. So the rest is, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. I'm already over time. Any questions? Good. Covered more than I thought we would.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
And everybody in
Thank you.
TV land, thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Would the company names go down?